Thank you so much for that great presentation. And I'm so glad we talked about ancillaries a little bit because I'm going to be mentioning that during my presentation here. Um, the title of this is Success Story. It actually should be Success Stories because of my work with Delmar and his wonderful team. I've just really gone over to, I'm such a believer in LibreText and definitely the LibreVerse. And there are many different stories that I have to share. And so I'll go ahead and get started here. This is the fairy tale of my adventure to and through the LibreVerse. Once upon a time in a mystic land far, far away, nestled in the redwoods of northwestern California, there lived a communication professor named Dr. Armeda Reitzel. Now, Dr. Reitzel had been teaching communication courses at Humboldt State University, now known as Cal Poly Humboldt, since 1981, after teaching for 2 years at Ball State University in Muncie, Indiana. Dr. Reitzel came of age in the 1970s, and that's where we'll begin the story. A story of success, or should I say stories of success, as you will see thanks to the LibreVerse, which Delmar on Monday of this week called a, quote, dynamic repository, end quote. So we'll go ahead and talk a little bit about the 70s. Now, for some of you, this might be something you might remember or you've read about it in history books. But I'll tell you one thing, at least around here in Humboldt County, trivia is a big deal. And knowing stuff about 1970s trivia is very helpful. I graduated from high school in the 1971. I got my bachelor's, master's, and PhD all during that decade. And I became a professor of communication in 1979. So the 70s were definitely the decade of where I was in higher education. And I want to tell you, many of you, if you're from that era or you've heard about that era, we didn't have the internet. The way that you got your materials, well, it was definitely you had to go buy an expensive book or two or even three at times, or you'd go to the library, have to go through the gigantic reader's guide to see what might be available. Use a card catalog. Oh my goodness, a card catalog to check out a book. And on occasion, a professor might put a book on reserve, but it was really costly to be able to study when you were going to school at that time. And so this was something that I was very, very concerned with when I became a professor. But I want to stick with the 70s for a little bit and try to get you involved a little bit in my presentation itself. So you got to promise me you won't get into Google now. Please promise me that, because I'm going to be asking you a few questions. I teach communication. I teach a whole bunch of different kinds of classes, but I always bring pop culture into almost every class that I teach, whether it's public speaking, American public discourse, intercultural communication. And I like to turn what might be considered trivia into teachable moments. I like to kind of sneak teaching in by calling it trivia. My students get kind of excited because they think it's kind of cool. It's something different, but they don't realize I'm actually teaching them something. One of my best lectures was when I snuck in something about Ronald Reagan's speech, 1987 speech, tear down this wall with the Berlin Wall. I brought it in as a trivia question, and it brought my students into that discussion. So I remind my students every day that pop culture of today is the history of tomorrow. And even last night, listening to a speech from one of my Com 100 or Com 1 students, my public speaking students, he was talking about gaming as a way to teach. I think LibreText and the LibreVerse is a wonderful type of, not exactly gaming, but it's close to it because it's so inviting. It's so exciting. And I use it a lot. Now, I do have some questions for you, so be ready. And either Delmar or Jennifer, whoever is there, whoever puts it into the chat, let me know what kind of responses you see, because I've got some questions for you. And again, if any of you are into trivia, this might be helpful to you. I'm helping you out here with the next trivia night that you go to. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there. That was a slogan that was developed in the early 70s. If you know who wrote that slogan, put it into the chat now. Like a good neighbor, State Farm in there. And I'm going to say, I know Jake from State Farm. He's the current guy. But Jake from State Farm was not back in the 70s. Delmar, are you seeing anybody there with the chat? Anybody putting it in about who wrote that?
There was a guess about Mr. Rogers. Uh,
Oh, no. I think you know what?
Don Draper.
No. I'm going to give you another one. Okay, I'll give you the answer in a minute. Just don't Google it yet. I am stuck on Band-Aid brand because Band-Aid stuck on me. Okay, that was kind of a little bit later. It was in the 70s, but a little bit later. Guess what? Those two slogans were written, or two jingles were written by the same person. I'm going to go ahead and tell you because I've got a limited amount of time here. It was written by Barry Manilow. I kid you not. He started his career writing jingles and he didn't get royalties. He just got a flat fee of $500. And then later on, he got the fame and fortune, but he still remembered. So he wrote a bunch of jingles. Now, the next one I'm going to give you, I honestly don't know who wrote it, but anybody remember this one? How do you spell relief? Oh, I see a nodding of a head here. If you said ROLAIDS, you are correct. You're absolutely correct. And a person who is really into Major League Baseball like myself, and I know a few of you others out there are as well, there was actually a Rolaids Major League Baseball award. It was called the Relief Man of the Year Award. And it was given out from 1976 to 2012 to people in both the American League and in the National League. So it's interesting how you can take a slogan, mass communication. See how I'm sneaking some teaching in here? You're taking mass communication. People relate to this. Even decades later, people remember this. It had an impact, and it's part of our pop culture, which has become history. I'm able to take this kind of information that I find, and I'm able to couple it very nicely into the LibreText textbooks that I use. And I'll talk more about that in a minute. But we're in 2024 right now. And how do you spell success? Well, I don't spell it ROLAIDS. I spell it LIBRETEXTS. Whew, that's a mouthful. LibreText. That's how I spell success. And for me, LibreText has been a real godsend. And I really do mean that. As a student who grew up, as I said, in the 70s, expensive books, hard to access things. It was just not user-friendly out there. It wasn't my professor's fault. It was the way things were at that time. But now we have so many different types of opportunities. But when I was a younger professor, maybe a few of you might have heard about this as well. Anybody remembers Kinko's packets? I used to go into the Kinko store. They knew me very well. Oh, here she comes again. I was really concerned with the cost of textbooks. Plus, the textbooks were not put together the way that I typically used them. I very seldom went chapter 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 15 in order. I ended up switching things around, bringing articles in. I did that from day one when I started teaching. So Kinko's packets, it was a lot cheaper for students, and I could put together what I wanted to teach. Does that kind of sound like what LibreText is doing now? In a way it is, isn't it? If you think about it. Again, when I started this, it predated the internet, so we didn't have the online option. But I really wanted my students to be successful. Myself, as a first generation student, buying things, but it was just so darn expensive. I wanted to make it user-friendly for my students. So LibreText is the way to go. These are the different kinds of classes here that I've listed here that I have taught using LibreText or an OER. Public speaking, interpersonal comm, intercultural comm, mass communication. And that's the one where I bring in my trivia questions, because the mass communication LibreText that I used, there were some articles there that were a little outdated, but you find that with a regular textbook too, because mass communication, the internet, all that changes, well, almost on an hourly basis, if you think about it. What was cool though, is in order to use the LibreText on mass comm, I was able to have my students help me update it. Oh, think about that, everybody. That's an exciting opportunity for students to be adding to a class. Adding to a textbook. You know what? They call that open pedagogy, where you have students involved in helping to create and teach what is going on. I was able to use LibreText because of the way it's developed and bring my students into the fold, and they helped me teach the class. That's how I've stuck that trivia stuff in there. And this fall, I'm going to be teaching small group communication. I've already adopted a small group book that's a LibreText book. And what's nice is now all of the LibreText that I use that are in all these different classes I've used in the past and will use, they go very nicely into my online classes because now I only teach online. And in fact, I started using OERs back in 2015, way before COVID, because the California State University system wanted somebody in the state university system to develop a fully online public speaking class. That's what I did in 2015. And I've been using the same textbook, online OER, since 2015 because it's such a good textbook. I absolutely love it. Yes, I do take chapters out of order, so I still kind of do my old-fashioned Kinko's approach, but it's an excellent resource. So if you're an online teacher or if you know somebody who is an online teacher, I really think OERs really meld very nicely into that. I'm going to speak a little bit about why I use and the excitement. And I am more than happy after this week is over. If you want to email me, I'm more than happy to set up a Zoom call with you, talk to you, because I get kind of excited about all the different cool things you can do with students and what students have created in my courses over the years. I'm just going to go very quickly through some of the different activities that I have used LibreText for with my students, because I want to make sure, number one, my students are reading, that they're using the textbook. And so I actually don't really rely on quizzes or tests very much at all. I give my students projects to do where they have to do a little bit of thinking. Well, not a little bit. They actually do have to do a lot of thinking, but I don't tell them that ahead of time. When they get into the project, they end up spending time, often more time than I even expect them to. I've heard that a lot about the easing that I'll talk about in a second. So these are just some of the student work that I have my students do. They don't do all of these in every single class, but I pick and choose what's appropriate for the class. I do what's called a 3R essay: read, record, reflect. I love the way that LibreText takes chapters and breaks them down into sections. It's wonderful for me as a professor, and it's wonderful for my students. I give my students choices. I'll give them 2 or 3 chapters. They choose a specific chapter. They read it. They record 2 or 3 specific pieces of information from that chapter that they thought was very pertinent to them. They reflect on it and have to bring a new idea in. That way, I know they're reading the material, they're thinking about the material, they have time to write something, and they share it out. And then we talk about it when I do the synchronous portion of my class. We'll talk about it in class. So that's kind of a cool activity. It gets me to know whether the students are really reading, and the students seem to dive into it more, and they love hearing each other's or reading each other's essays. The second one I've used with my public speaking class, and I also used it with my intercultural communication class, my own illustrated glossary entry. A number of the LibreTexts that I use have a glossary, and I thought it'd be kind of cool if I could have my students develop their own glossary. And with a glossary, they take a term, they research that term, they write up their definition of the term with some examples, and they have to add an illustration or some type of image or a photo. Now, I go over in terms of Creative Commons, the kinds of things they can and can't use, but they have to create their own glossary entry. Again, it gives them time to really grapple with material in the LibreText. The big one, and I've done a couple of presentations on this with students, is the electronic magazine project, the e-zine. I've used this in a number of classes where students are given the opportunity to choose 2 chapters from the LibreText. They develop a series of essays, like magazine articles, like when you go to the doctor's office and read those old-fashioned paper kind. I just went to the dentist yesterday. They had a plethora of old magazines there. Well, with the e-zine, it's the same idea. Students create their own magazine articles, and they have to illustrate them, and they have to deal with, it has to connect with at least 2 chapters of the book. I have also done it as a group project, and that's been interesting because then that's the way students have to talk with each other about ideas. Again, I tell them, you're going to put this together, but you're not going to be writing it for me. You're going to be writing it for a general population out there. So they have to do audience analysis and think about how would they explain to somebody who might be in a doctor's office or to mom or dad or to a friend of theirs some concepts in a class. Well, they use LibreText as a starting point, they formulate it, and then they create their e-zine. It's really been a really positive experience for me as a professor because I see the gears going there and the creativity happening with my students. Quiz questions. Well, I don't actually use quizzes much in terms of giving it to them, but I have my students sometimes write quiz questions themselves. It gives them that opportunity to look at material a little bit different with the lens of a teacher, as opposed to, oh my gosh, I have to memorize this, or I've got to find the right answer and, do A, B, C, or D. They have to think about how to write the question, which means they have to actually understand the material better in order to write a good question. So I've used that as well. So they create the questions. On occasion, I've taken their quiz questions and I give them feedback on it. So I'm the student and they're the teacher. And then finally, one really fun one at the end of the semester that I use, kind of like, rather than giving a final exam, I actually had them create a meme. They took a concept from public speaking and they created a meme about it. And oh my goodness, the creativity was phenomenal. But again, LibreText formed a foundation for all of this, all of these creations from the students. My goal was to have students create, to give them choices, give them ownership, and they were going to be teaching me as an audience member and the outside world as well. So these are some student creations that I've done, and I'm more than happy to share this with folks if you want to contact me. The instructor creations. Well, this is why I was really happy that Rachel mentioned ancillaries. I had a legacy project for me. I did one, we just finished it about a month ago or so. I was one of the co-authors of many co-authors for a textbook on interpersonal communication for the ASCCC. After that project was completed, I wrote a grant, and with 3 colleagues from other community colleges in the state of California, we formed a great working team. I loved working with these people. We formed a team where we created a set of ancillaries to go along with the interpersonal book that ASCCC OERI developed. And we really thought about this long and hard. We had some great discussions among the 4 of us. What kinds of ancillaries did we want to create? What was the format that we wanted to use? We wanted to make it user-friendly. We wanted to give teachers a lot of different opportunities to, here are a lot of different options for you, but take it and run with it, make it your own, depending upon who you are teaching. We had formative questions. These were sets of questions that if a teacher wanted to put this into their teaching, they could use it as a discussion item. It could be a quiz for students. It would just be a way for the students to do a double check. Are they really understanding the material? So you could go to the asset port down there. If you see that link at the bottom of the slide there, I put this in there. This is where you can find all the ancillaries for the particular book that I'm talking about. It just got up, I think, Delmar, within the last month or so. So it's been a really recent addition. I know I always check assets before I adopt a book because I want to know what's available. Formative questions, we got summative questions. Again, a wonderful set of the traditional type of questions you might put into a test. We had different ideas, 4 different discussion ideas for every single chapter, and 4 creative assignments for every single chapter. Yes, that's a lot of information, but we wanted to give teachers who might be considering a book options that they could use. And what was said earlier too, sometimes if you have an instructor who is a part-time instructor, they get the assignment like a day before, if they're lucky, before they have to teach. We wanted to make ancillaries that somebody, if they got something right at the last minute, they could pretty much use right away if they needed to. So we created this for teachers, and we were really excited. It was a wonderful team to work with. It was a get to. So I hope that if there's a book out there that you're considering, please, 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 if it doesn't have ancillaries, share it. This book on mass communication that I use, it had ancillaries as well, but I took every single ancillary that I used and I modified it, I updated it, I made it kind of appropriate for the class I was teaching. I intend to share those ancillaries at the end of the summer when I have time to really review them. I'm going to share it with LibreText so that there are more ancillaries out there. I think that's one of the beauties of LibreText that I really like, is the sharing. And then another instructor creation, remixing an OER. That's one thing that I really want to do, because I add in so many things like those little trivia moments. I bring that stuff in. I'd like to incorporate that into some of the LibreText I'm using. I'd like to incorporate, where it's appropriate, internal review questions for students. But again, that would be something that I would want to do, pick and choose, not overdo it. And then I'd like to include some of my students' contributions, things that they've done. And I've gotten a lot of permissions from students to share out their information and their assignments. So that I've already gotten all those permissions from the students to include that in some of the content that I'm using. It's really nice. And I always tell students, if it's included, you can put it on your resume, because I also teach the capstone class for communication. And then what's really cool is I get to be a student, and my students get to be instructors, and we work together. Again, the trivia questions, I've done conference presentations with students about their projects. So that's really nice to have that real collaboration. My students feel so professional, and they look so professional. They do such a great job when they co-present. And this is another opportunity for them to share out what they've learned from a LibreText. And in the future, I've already talked to a few folks about the e-zine project, the electronic magazine. I've talked to some of the students, and we may be putting that together and sharing it out as an OER itself. So we're really excited about that. So again, it's getting the students involved and really into that LibreText, using materials there. The next two slides I'm going to go over very quickly. These are the comments that my students shared with me at the end of the semester in terms of why they really liked using LibreText. And it wasn't just because it was free. In fact, very few students actually mentioned it was free. They went into more what LibreText was all about, that there were sections of content. This made the reading, the understanding, the referencing much more manageable for them. They like the writing style of the text that I used. And I think it's because it tends to be a little bit more informal. The content is still there. Those concepts are there, but it's more user-friendly language. Timely examples, because you can update. The acronyms, especially for the interpersonal book that I helped co-author, the acronyms are really helpful. Now, one group of students that I teach prisoners as well as regular university and college, community college students. I've taught for Pelican Bay State Prison up north from me. And then I also teach for a university back east, Ashland University. And it is a correctional education program in 15 states plus the District of Columbia. My students in both prison settings, they really liked those acronyms. They appreciated that. And they would often write about that in their essays to me. In the LibreText, what I'm finding, and my students obviously did too, the diversity, inclusivity of people represented in the visual images that were there, that was really important to them. And as we were writing the textbook that I helped co-author, we took that really to heart. We really worked hard on that. Also, narratives were shared by the authors, and that storytelling. Storytelling is so important to people. When I teach public speaking, I talk about the idea of storytelling. I find that in many of the LibreTexts that I use. And the freedom to use the content in their own creations, students really like that. And their opportunity to contribute their ideas, their content to another open educational resource. They love that opportunity. They felt like they were more on par, more like it was a real exchange of information. So it was really neat to see that empowerment on the part of students. AAA. No, it's not American Automobile Association. I've got 3 A's that I associate with LibreText. They are adopt, adapt, and adept. And I'm going to talk about them very quickly here. The first one is adopt. It is so easy, and from my perspective, to find something online, especially through LibreText. It's so user-friendly that I can find information I want to adopt. And if I don't want to adopt an entire OER and just part of it, I can do that. That's what's so nice about this. So I can adopt what I want to adopt. I can adapt it how I would like to see it used in my particular course. That's been so user-friendly. And now, of course, with adapt, where you can really, with your projects, you can really create homework assignments. So again, you can adapt it to the audience that you're interacting with, the students that you have. Because I teach very different, very different groups of students. Humboldt State University, College of the Redwoods, Pelican Bay State Prison, and that back east, that other correctional education program that's in a whole bunch of different states. And so it's really important to adapt. I find that I'm able to do that easily as an instructor. And then finally, adept. It makes me feel like I'm professional and I'm able to do really what I want to do. And I went a step further for all of you. How is the word adept from other adjectives? Well, it means that you're expert, proficient, skilled, and skillful, and we all want to be that, obviously. But it also, and I like the very part, the end of this, adept implies special aptitude as well as proficiency. And I think that is a real key here. Our attitude and our aptitude in order to use these materials and use them enthusiastically and energetically. I think that is so important. I feel like I can do that more with LibreText, different OERs, than I can with a regular, very tried and true, but sometimes kind of sterile textbook that's been produced by a publisher. So back to the fairy tale. I'm going to be ending my presentation right now with a nostalgic application of a song. I'm going to go back to the 1960s. And again, I know I may be the oldest individual, but back when I was in junior high, there was this group that was really, really popular. I used to watch it on TV. Remember TV when it wasn't just a streaming service? I watched it on TV once a week. And it was about, well, the name of the group was called the Monkees. Anybody ever hear of the Monkees? Monkees? Well, the Monkees were so popular. And I remember that being such a major part of my childhood and junior high time. Well, and you know what? Here's the other thing too. I found out one reason I get asked by all my young friends, I mean people in their 30s, 40s, and 50s. I'm not quite in that age range. They bring me to their trivia nights because I know the Monkees. And one time I wasn't with them. There was a trivia question about the Monkees. And they said, gosh darn it, we wish Armeda were here. Well, let me tell you what I did, because it reminds me of the 2024 LibreFest. This is a song from that was written. I'll tell you who wrote it. Neil Diamond wrote this song. I'm a Believer. Some of you may have heard this song, but I reframed it a bit. So I'd like to go ahead and read it. I promise I won't sing it. I thought OERs were only true in fairy tales, meant for someone else, but not for me. Textbook publishers are out to get me. Da-da, da-da. I have to put that in. That's the way it seemed. Da-da, da-da. Disappointment haunted all my dreams. Then I entered the Libreverse. Now I'm a believer. Not a trace of doubt in my mind. I'm in awe. I'm a believer. I couldn't leave the Libreverse if I tried. Yeah, I truly have become I wanted to try to word believer in here. So yeah, I do believe in the Libreverse. And so there is a happy ending to this fairy tale of mine. LibreText is now how I spell success. The end. Thank you very much for listening. I appreciate you listening. And that's it.
Wow. Thank you very much. I'd hate to actually see what your spell check does on your computer when you're actually writing things based off of how you spell stuff.
Hey, I do what I can do. What can I say?
There you go.
So again, if anybody is interested, I probably should have left that last slide up. I had my email. I'll put my email address into the chat. If anybody would like to talk, I get very excited about this. I loved talking about ideas about how we can interact with our students, especially because LibreText is so user-friendly. And Delmar, you and your team have just done a wonderful job of putting things together. And I really like the opportunity to see ancillaries there. So that for me is a big selling point. So I really appreciate that.
Thank you.
So I'll go ahead and put my email into the chat for anybody who wants to email me. And I don't know if there's any questions that I could address quickly. I'm watching time. Oh, see, I'm a speech teacher. It's 10:30.
That's fine.
So,
As a chemistry teacher, I don't have to care about time.
oh,
But I may mention something that would be of particular interest to you, and I know it's of interest to others in the audience. So after a bit of pressure by Christina Moon, who was here, okay, she's in the other side here, from Chabot College, who teaches Spanish. Uh, so she's forcing me aggressively in order to expand. She says she's not, but she is expanding Adapt to have the same capabilities of a system called VoiceThread. And I'm not
oh,
sure. Yeah.
yeah, I did VoiceThread. I was one of the early adopters of VoiceThread back in 2015 when I was teaching online. And it's because at that time, that was one way I had my students begin doing their public speaking. I am so into VoiceThread. Christina, yes, yes, say yes. Don't say no, say yes. VoiceThread's awesome, but it is
So
expensive.
yeah, well, so I'm leaving for Thailand tonight, and then I'm going to be there for 2 weeks. And during that period of time, that Eric, the primary programmer for Adapt, doesn't have me sending emails to him every hour, that he will actually focus on building this infrastructure. So there's a good chance that by the end of this month, a beta version of that will be available in order to be able to pursue your interests. And anyone else who wants to bring in more peer-to-peer engagement in their classroom for however they use that pedagogy.
I'd be, and Delmar, I'd be really happy to share stuff that I did with VoiceThread when we had it at Humboldt, because I adopted that early on with my public speaking classes. And now that I know this is going to be happening, I'm teaching public speaking at the College of the Redwoods and at Humboldt in the fall, and I'm using an OER. Maybe I can try it out. So I can
Yeah,
do that.
well, like I said, it should be available for beta testing by the end of this month. Uh, so I'll let him do his stuff, and then we'll come in and start to guide him in terms of honing it to be useful. So your feedback would be great, or anyone else who has an interest in that technology. And if you're unfamiliar with it, you can Google VoiceThread or email Christina anytime
No.
during the day
See,
or night.
Delmar, now you have to pay me. I told you that the moment that you mention VoiceThread, people will get it and excited because VoiceThread, Armeda, you probably know it's not cheap. That license is very expensive to maintain. And if we could have something like that in Adapt, will be awesome, not just for the ones that, people that use it in languages and obviously for comp, but other disciplines. Even Delmar is considering it for his chemistry class. That would be an interesting voice thread, talking about
Slowly
who
going.
knows what.
I had a hard time understanding how I can use it in order to balance equations, but I could see some applications in the way that I teach my class. So it'd be great in order to have this opportunity, this resource available. Christina has made me a believer, to quote the monkeys, and and such. So we are a few minutes over. Like I said, I don't follow the time, but if anyone wants to chime in with a question or concern, this would be a great time for doing so. Otherwise, you can contact Armeda directly. She put her email address, I think, in the chat there, and she's always excited to talk about what she's doing, if that's not obvious from her presentation.